Hello everyone. In today's video, a teenager would disappear on her way home from a friend's to go home to celebrate her mother's birthday. However, she would never show up, and the worst outcome possible would happen to this family just days later. Who did such unspeakable things to this young girl yet showed remorse? And could claims years later from a potential victim be true? Dana Bradley was born on July 24th of 1967 in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, in Canada, to her mother Dawn and stepfather Jeff Levitz. The details on Dana's birth father haven't been made public, but it doesn't seem like he played a major role raising her. This case also takes place in a city that we've spoken much about recently. St. John's is a city on Newfoundland Island off Canada's Atlantic coast, and is the capital of the province, known for its colorful row houses. Despite being a larger city, it still has a small town vibe where everyone knew everyone. 14-year-old Dana was in 9th grade at I.J. Sampson Junior High School, where she was an excellent student and passionate about art. She was described as a beautiful young girl excited about life, who was smart, friendly, and caring with a large circle of friends. She was said to be a good, bright, and social child. Now, the information on Dana's upbringing is limited as her family hasn't spoken to the media much over the years due to just how traumatic this entire experience has been with losing their daughter. What we do know is that on December 14th of 1981, Dana would go to school that day. Around 2:50 p.m. when school was over, Dana would meet up with some friends at a convenience store as was planned. Dana and her friends then went over to a friend named Penny Cobb's home, which was located at a cul-de-sac on Curry Place off of Topsail Road in the West End neighborhood of St. John's. Dana would only spend a few hours at Penny's home because she was looking forward to celebrating her mother's birthday with family later that night. Before leaving, Dana would even call home just to let her family know that she was about to leave and head that way. I've seen two different stories of either her grandmother or her mother Dawn answering the phone and her speaking to them, but she told this family member that she would be walking to a bus stop located on Topsail Road, which was a busy main street across from a Tim Hortons. She also indicated that she would arrive home around 5:30 p.m. This is the last time that Dana's family would speak to her. After this phone call, she gathered up her school items and she told her friends that she would see them tomorrow at school. She then headed out the door to the bus stop. For a while, it is thought that Dana waited at this bus stop for the bus to come, but either she missed the bus or it was taking too long, so she started to grow impatient and decided to hitchhike. A man named Harry Smeaton and his brother John, who were selling Christmas trees from an empty lot behind the bus stop, would later tell police that they were sitting on their truck waiting for customers when they witnessed a girl matching Dana's description attempting to hitchhike. It stood out to them because they made a comment to one another about what a marvel it was that such a young girl was hitchhiking. They also confirmed that this bus stop was opposite the Tim Hortons, which was around a 5-minute walk from Dana's friend's home. Around 5:20 p.m., the brothers would end up witnessing a four-door 1973 to 1976 Dodge Dart or Plymouth Valiant sedan pull over with an adult male in the driver's seat who had reached across the passenger seat to open the door and let her in. Unfortunately, the brothers would not remember what the license plate said, only that it was very rusty. When Dana didn't arrive for her mother's party, her family immediately became concerned and would contact the Newfoundland police to file a missing persons report. Just 4 days later, on December 18th, a man named Dale Smith would be in a wooded area of Maddox Cove searching for a Christmas tree to take home. This area is south of St. John's and quite rural. Despite the remote setting, garbage was said to be littered throughout the remote forest, indicating that it was commonly used for a disposal site for trash. While out there, Dale would notice visible footprints in the snow, and would also appear to be a mannequin laying in the snow. But it was not a mannequin. Instead, it was the body of 14-year-old Dana Bradley. Realizing what he was seeing, Dale ended up flagging down a woodcutter nearby and asking him to stay with the body while he went to go call for help. When police arrived, they would discover Dana laying on her back, with her arms across her chest and her school books tucked under her arms. They described the position in which Dana was left as if she had been positioned at a funeral home in a burial fashion. In one article, it was also noted that plugs of soil were found forced into her nostrils. But due to the position that she was found in, authorities believed at the time that her killer may have been remorseful, may have knew Dana, or it may have been their first murder. According to her autopsy, Dana's cause of death was blunt force head trauma, due to a skull fracture that was caused by a blunt object. She had sadly also been SA'd, and small amounts of male DNA would end up being recovered at the crime scene. The medical examiner would eventually conclude that Dana had been killed the same day she had disappeared. But keep in mind, back in the early 80s, forensic technology was not the same as it is today, so at that time, they didn't really have much to go off of. Word of Dana's body being found would shock the community. That same day, it was said that her school was hosting a dance, so teachers ended up launching into comforting the students. Everyone had held up hope that Dana would be found alive. The principal at the time saying, quote, "I think that was the beginning of the shock," end quote. Dana's murder would launch what would be called the most expensive and extensive murder investigation in Canadian history. The initial task force would comprise of 35 full-time investigators from both the RCMP and the Newfoundland Constabulary. Hundreds of people were said to be interviewed and thousands of tips came in, and more than 800 cars would be examined in the initial weeks following her disappearance. RCMP officers were said to search every square inch of where her body was found, sometimes even on their hands and knees. In the first 6 weeks, it was said that $500,000 was spent searching for Dana's killer.
It was 4 days after Dana Bradley disappeared that her body was found in a wooded area near Maddox Cove. The 14-year-old girl had been murdered, apparently by a man who had picked her up December 14th as she was hitchhiking on Topsail Road. Since the body was found, police have been searching for a man who resembles this sketch. The police have also checked over 2,000 cars that resemble the vehicle driven by the killer. And they're looking at even more cars as the investigation continues. Despite the massive investigation and the fact that it has been a month and a half since the body was found, no one has been arrested. But the investigating team, headed by RCMP Inspector Jack Lavers, is still optimistic they will find the killer.
We're hopeful we'll have success sooner rather than later, but we're very confident that we will have success.
You obviously can't put a time frame on it, can you?
No, I can't, and I don't think that anyone else can. This is not at all possible. It's just to reiterate that we feel we're doing all that we can possibly do. We've got the full support of the community, have had since the beginning. We've got our best people working on it. They're working on it full time. Every day since the 18th of December, Christmas, New Year's, weekends, and after hours, and so on, and there's been no lessening of effort or determination on the part of the people employed.
How many suspects would you say you've actually brought in and questioned?
Well, we've literally talked to thousands of people, and certainly they're not all suspects. But in crimes of this nature, this whodunit variety of crime, murder, as opposed to the smoking gun type, you do create a list of possible suspects within your community based on their prior history and their opportunity for the crime and things of that nature. And I would say that we've eliminated several hundred people really who probably would come to our attention in the normal police process and the normal investigation process.
While police were searching, Dana's family began to be harassed by an unknown male caller who continued to call their home at odd hours of the day asking to speak with Dana. And on one occasion, he called to say that he killed her. A tracing device ended up being put on the phone, which led to the arrest of 22-year-old Bruce Gerard Connors, who was also from St. John's. These harassing calls would turn into a 9-month jail sentence for him. Just what a weirdo. I don't understand why people do these things to these families, but it seems to happen quite often. As the years passed, the RCMP was said to be foiled by wrong turns, crackpots, false information, fruitless searches, and a dire lack of evidence. Inspector Ron Evans of the RCMP's Criminal Investigation Branch saying, quote, "We believe we do know the murderer, but we can't get tunnel vision. We have to keep the options open because right now we don't have the sufficient evidence to proceed in court," end quote. Which I think is extremely rare to hear police say that they don't want to get tunnel vision. In a lot of cases we cover, it seems like either police aren't investigating enough, they outright just don't come out and say that they have any suspects, or they won't at least let the public know that they think they have an idea who may be responsible, or they do seem to have tunnel vision and they just specifically look at one idea like, oh, the person unalived themselves, or, you know, they wandered off into the wilderness and it must have been the elements. They don't look into, you know, possible murders. Although I understand in this case, there's definitely evidence that she didn't do this to herself, obviously. Sometimes there's just no evidence and they just don't know where to look. But they sometimes seem to go in like one specific direction and don't look at everything. And I actually really do appreciate that in this case, the police have come out and said, we have an idea who the killer is, but we just don't have enough evidence to pin it on them. Because there are so many cases we go through where we're like, hey, it seems kind of obvious that someone might be involved, but police just don't make a peep. And it makes everyone wonder, like, hey, are they investigating? It seems like they're doing nothing. When behind the scenes, it may be this exact same scenario where they also agree that they think this person's good for it, but they just don't have the specific evidence they need to take them to court, which is so frustrating. And it's very easy, I think, to get distracted and focus on theories, which could allow the truth to go unanswered. And I'm obviously not saying this is every police force because I do root for law enforcement, but I do think it happens in certain cases and in certain counties and certain scenarios where these law enforcement groups take their pride before solving the case. They may have made a wrong choice or not collected certain evidence, and instead of saying like, hey, we fucked up, they, try to cover it up or try to, allude to other things. So I think we need to, give credit where credit's due. And despite this case getting a lot of heat from certain people saying that the RCMP is not doing their job, I think we need to give them credit for at least saying, we have an idea of a suspect, but we just can't pin it on them. But because of this, by May of 1982, with no new developments, the task force was forced to significantly reduce. But public anxiety of a killer remaining on the loose was still really high. And now, I said all of that, but we have a bit of a twist in this case, of course, because in 1986, a 35-year-old man named David Grant Somerton from Mount Pearl would leave a note at a post office implicating himself in the murder. He would then allegedly confess to Dana's murder and be arrested. After this, nearly $1 million would be spent digging up the city's landfill as well as Maddox Cove Road in a desperate attempt for physical evidence that would link David Somerton to the crime. But nothing ever was. There was no evidence, there was no murder weapon, and no car. David would later recount his confession, claiming that his confession had been coerced after being subjected to an 18-hour interrogation. It was also noted that he had a history of mental illness as well as substance abuse problems. In an interview with CTV's W5, he would state, quote, "I was on the verge of flipping out on them, and I was in a self-harm state in the room. I said, have me charged or get me out of this room. And then I started telling them where the car was. Then I told them where the murder weapon was. I was doing anything to get them to back off and get me out of that room, including confessing." End quote. Now, as most Canadian cases go, the transcripts from his interrogation have never been made public. However, apparently, David knew things and described things to the police that only they knew, which is a very important thing to clue in on when you're interrogating a suspect. That's why police obviously don't release everything, because there's certain information that they want to keep close to the vest because it's information only the killer would know. And for one reason or another, it seems to be out there that he said things to the police that only the killer would know, which made the police even more suspicious, obviously. However, we don't have that information to read ourselves, to, indicate. I'm just letting you know what's out there. But what do you think about that? Because it's also been said that he gave police incorrect information, including that he told them that he had abandoned a car at a local dump and buried a black jacket along Maddox Cove near where Dana's body had been discovered, which is why they spent all of this money trying to find those items and never did. And because it seems like his whole story was just a load of crap, his murder charges were eventually dropped. Because of this false confession, David would later be convicted of public mischief in relation to the false confession and sentenced to 2 years in prison. In 2006, the RCMP would report that they continued to get tips, up to 50 tips a year, related to Dana's disappearance and murder. Then, around 2011, what I would call the biggest theory and claims in this case would happen. A man whose sources would call Robert would come forward claiming that he had witnessed Dana's murder, claiming it had taken him so long to come forward because of repressed memories. Robert would claim that he had only recovered the memories of the murder as well as memories of his own childhood essay by the same man after he had quit drinking. Robert saying, quote, "The alcohol was helping me cope, but it turned on me. When I took it out of the equation, I found myself, but I had no idea what was coming to the surface. And believe me, I've laid in bed and asked myself, did that really happen? I tried to think it away, that maybe it didn't, but I can't. It's in me." End quote. Robert claimed that on December 14th of 1981, the day that Dana disappeared, he was 6 years old at the time, and him and his 4-year-old brother were with a family friend named Thomas Carey, who is an alleged PDF file. Thomas was said to be driving his father's 1972 Dodge Dart and offered to take the kids to a McDonald's on Topsail Road, since their parents were out for the evening. The two boys were sitting in the back seat of the car as Thomas drove when the man noticed Dana attempting to thumb a ride east on Topsail Road. Keep in mind that McDonald's seems to be right next to the Tim Hortons across the street from where Dana had been trying to hitchhike from outside. But this decision would lead to a frightening and horrifying night as the man would pull over on the side of the road and offer Dana a ride. Robert saying, quote, "He pulled up on the side of the road and he leaned over to open the door or tried to unlock the door. Dad had trouble with that door handle. The problem wasn't unlocking it because it didn't matter. What you had to do was open it from the inside. So I told him he had to grab the handle. What the media reported is a 4-door car, and what I believe and that Dad believes he had was a 2-door Dodge Dart." End quote. Robert's father was also said to have a Plymouth Valiant at the time that he was using for parts. Both cars, he thinks, were buried on a former property that he owned. Now, if you remembered, I said that the two brothers that were selling Christmas trees behind the bus stop and witnessed Dana getting into that vehicle only said that there was a male driver in the car. They didn't say that there was children or even 2 children in the back seat. Now, Robert claims this is because they were so short that the 2 witnesses wouldn't have seen them sitting in the back seat. Robert claims that once Dana got into the vehicle, she turned around and asked him and his brother what their names were and how old they were and what grade they were in. And he says that at first the drive was normal. But as they approached Dana's home and she pointed it out, Thomas kept driving, which quickly set panic in on Dana as well as himself. He recalls Dana wanting Thomas to stop as they were heading towards Shea Heights, a wooded and remote area outside of St. John's, saying, quote, "She tried to jump out of the car going up a couple of sections of those hills, and he grabbed a hold of her and he'd speed up, and he kept telling her he was going to turn around, and eventually he pulled off up there into some kind of pit. I feel like I'm walking on sacred territory here now because her mom doesn't even know the details of things I'm telling you." He kept saying he just wanted a kiss. She was crying and fighting him, and eventually, it wasn't very long, she scratched him on the face and pinched him or something because he jumped up, and she grabbed the door and got out and bolted. He got out. One of those things I remember is how quickly he got out of that car and bolted after her. End quote. Robert then says that he also got out of the vehicle and told his little brother to stay inside. This is when he witnessed Dana nearly making it to the tree line before she was caught. He then says that Dana screamed for help as Thomas began essaying her. He then would use a tire iron to murder her. Robert then claims that Thomas put Dana's bloodied body in the trunk of the car and they transported her to that wooded area where she would later be found. He then claims that the car was buried after this. Now, of course, this information sounds extremely terrifying. I can agree. It is horrific, especially if a 6-year-old boy was witness to all of this. A 6-year-old boy who was also allegedly essayed by this exact same man. But police seem to disagree. Led by RCMP Sergeant Kent Osmond, police would end up investigating Robert's claims for 16 months. But they would conclude that substantial portions of his memories didn't match known facts of the case. It stated that, quote, "Sergeant Osmond and his team spent a solid 16 months investigating Robert's information and, as explained in your previous articles, came to the conclusion that in the case of witnessing Dana's murder, he is wrong. Unfortunately, Robert won't accept this and has subsequently continued to occupy too much of the investigative team's time that could have been spent clearing other leads." End quote. RCMP would go on to say that Robert suffered from false memory syndrome. However, that is not recognized in the medical community. It's also said that police were unable to corroborate any evidence of Robert's own essay claims against Thomas. However, I'm honestly not really sure how an adult man could prove his essay as a 6-year-old boy. And that's not me saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that seems like an incredibly hard thing to prove, which is awful for victims. At the end of the day, it really is like he said, she said, or I guess a he said in the situation, which is extremely tragic for victims. It's just something that, especially decades later, will be incredibly, incredibly hard to prosecute. Not that I'm diminishing it if it did happen to him. It's obviously incredibly horrific if it did, and he definitely deserves justice if that truly is what happened to him. But I could also see the point of view from the RCMP of not having, the evidence to prosecute someone, just as they don't have the evidence to prosecute Dana's killer. Robert would end up submitting a complaint to the Commission for Public Complaints against the RCMP about the way that investigators handled his information. He alleges that the RCMP relied on false memory syndrome to make the decision to dismiss his complaints, which, as I said, isn't recognized in the medical community. I also see noted that Robert's father ended up recalling the RCMP officers visiting his home in the weeks surrounding Dana's murder, because at the time it was said that like 2,000 cars matching the description of the suspected vehicle ended up being examined. And apparently Robert's father says that his vehicle was one of them. So I don't know if his vehicle was actually checked and maybe it was just overlooked. Maybe it wasn't examined well enough because it was the early 80s. Maybe if the car was cleaned, they didn't have the means to, effectively collect DNA if there was DNA in there. So, I mean, it could have been looked at and just overlooked and they just didn't know at the time. Or it either actually wasn't looked at or it was and just nothing was found. So it was, at the end of the day, police are right. But I don't know. This is a really complicated one. And it's so complicated because Robert actually has tons of people who seem to back him and believe his version of events over the police. That year, hundreds of people would show up in the pouring rain for a vigil demanding justice for Dana in Petty Harbor. Similar vigils would be held in Witless Bay, Renews, and Bowring Park in St. John's. During the vigil in Petty Harbor, the group was said to sing Christmas carols and then hand out hot chocolate provided by Tim Hortons. Even as the years pass, people are still out there advocating and fighting for justice and answers for this young girl. In May of 2016, the RCMP would announce that they had recovered new DNA evidence after retesting a sample that had been recovered in 1981. And this new DNA linked to an unknown male subject. Thanks to new advances in technology, they're now able to use this sample to test it against suspects, as well as suspects that they may have ruled out in the past, just because, of the circumstances at the time, honestly. And now they can go back and just double check that it may not have been those people because, hey, it's happened before where someone's been ruled out just because of maybe something small they've said, and then they go back and they retest and it was actually that person. Now, as I said, Robert's detailed claims have not been believed by the RCMP. And from what I have read, the RCMP has tested this DNA against Thomas Carey, and that DNA did not match. Let me know if I'm wrong about that, but that is what I read. And if that is true, then obviously Robert's story has to just be ruled out at this point, and police really do need to look other ways. They need to look at other people. They need to look at other evidence, other claims. They need to look at other tips. And I know a lot of people want to believe Robert's claims, and I can understand that because the details are horrific. The details seem very specific. However, if the DNA truly did not match Thomas Carey, we need to not have tunnel vision and specifically keep focusing on this, as police have said. We need to do what the police are doing. We need to not have tunnel vision, guys. Because again, there is so many rumors and speculation in this case to the point where the family is upset about it. We'll talk about it in a moment. And I know how passionate people are about this case. This seems to be a case where there's a lot of passion behind it. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy that Dana has support, even after all of these years, that there are still people out there supporting her and rooting for this case to be solved. If the DNA says it's not this person, we need to move on and we need to look other places.
Inspector Cal, you say this DNA evidence represents a breakthrough in the Dana Bradley case. What do you mean by breakthrough?
It's a significant breakthrough in the investigation in that we now have unknown suspect DNA. Moving forward, we're able to clear tips and eliminate suspects from the file utilizing this new DNA evidence.
So you don't know who the suspect is as of yet?
No, we don't.
Okay.
So this DNA evidence is going to help us move forward with that.
I know that, initially, back in 1982, I believe, Dave Somerton was arrested and charged with the murder, and subsequently there was a stay of proceedings. Will that be re-examined?
So the new DNA evidence is relatively new, and we are eliminating suspects as we speak, and we have eliminated some, and we are at present reviewing the file now and going back towards our old suspects.
This is a 35-year case. You've obviously had hundreds and hundreds of calls and leads over the years. How many suspects are we talking about?
Many. There's many suspects. The exact number, I mean, you're looking at hundreds of suspects.
So what happens from here on out? I mean, how long are we looking at in terms of eliminating all those suspects? I mean, I guess first of all, are we looking at hundreds of suspects or tens of suspects? You know, can you give us a general idea?
Well, over the years, there's been a large number of suspects that have been eliminated. However, we will review them in light of this new DNA evidence. DNA is one tool in the tool belt of many investigational tools. So coupled with all the investigational tools, it makes for a stronger and more definitive process.
Today we contacted the family, and you know, obviously they say they hope this brings this case to a resolution, a quick resolution. How much hope should they hold out, you know, after all these years of, I guess, you know, false leads and you know, the case being in the news? You know, how much hope should they have?
So it brings great optimism when you have DNA evidence. DNA evidence is very, you know, it's what investigators want to obtain on the file. It's the most important evidence that we can find, basically, in today's, you know, age. So there are cases that are unsolved, and we do have DNA. So, but we hope moving forward that this is the breakthrough we've been looking for.
What is it about this case that makes it so important after all these years?
Well, it is a murder, and it's a murder of a young girl, and you know, Newfoundland is a small province, so all murders are, you know, equally important. This one has, you know, been in the spotlight since it occurred.
All right, Inspector Cal, thank you for talking to me.
No problem. Thank you.
And I say all of this because despite what is out there, civilian members have a Facebook group called Justice for Dana Bradley, and they would rally together to dig up the buried vehicles that were once connected to Dana's murder, which I think, again, at the end of the day, is a great thing, that there are people out there rallying for justice. But once these avenues have been ruled out, can't keep dwelling on the same suspects and the same theories if that stuff has already been ruled out. The media would capture as volunteers excavated the vehicles from a site off Tufts Road in Witless Bay, around 30 kilometers from where Dana's body had been found. Subsequent to the excavation, it was determined that no usable evidence was found on either vehicles, due to extensive degradation of the vehicles during the time period in which they were buried, which was nearly 30 years at that point, as well as contamination from sewage runoff and other chemicals. Now, I'm not completely sure in this instance if these specific vehicles have not been ruled out because of the state that they were in, because there may have been evidence on them, but because they sat there for so long and they were contaminated, now evidence can't be taken. However, let me know if I'm wrong, because I know someone will. Were these vehicles the vehicle of Robert's father, which his father allegedly claims was already checked by police back in the 80s? If it is the same vehicle, and police did check it, they could have maybe just not checked it well enough, again, as I said, because the 80s technology wasn't the same as it is now. It might not have been checked the same way it would have been today. And maybe there was evidence then that just wasn't collected. However, if we go back to what the claims are, Thomas Carey was ruled out through DNA, which would then mean to me that there most likely wouldn't be Dana's, DNA on these vehicles. It's not impossible, but that's just where that leads me. However, if I'm wrong about him being ruled out, then obviously that's still all on the table. I know someone will tell me, so let's chat down below, because I am very interested in this case. I was recommended it multiple times to look into it and to cover it, which is why I'm sitting here today talking about it. I will say the information on this case is pretty sparse, but there is some. There's more than some cases that I cover for sure, but I'm sure there's probably those of you out there who have been following this case for decades. So let me know if you're an expert on this case or you feel like you're an expert on this case. Let's chat more about it. That's what the comment section's for. I'm truly just a girl with Google and newspapers.com. So I'm sure there's more people out there who are more of an expert on this case than I am. And I'm really curious on what you know. Over the years, Dana's disappearance and murder captivated the public to the point where in 1991, Newfoundland Broadcasting reenacted the murder in segments during their evening news program over several days. In 2003, a book by author Darren McGrath was written titled Hitching a Ride, The Unsolved Murder of Dana Bradley. Also in 2003, singer-songwriter Ron Hynes released a song called The Ghost of Dana Bradley, inspired by her murder. Police are also said to have cabinets stuffed with statements, tips, and leads from hundreds of people over the years. At least 3 different men are said to have been convicted during the search for Dana's killer, but sadly, her killer could still be walking our streets. He could have more victims. And when it comes to this case, there seem to be a lot of rumors, there seems to be a lot of speculation, there seems to be a lot of passionate people who have followed this case for decades. As I said, this seems to be claimed to be the most expensive search and murder investigation in Canada's history for this teen girl. Yet her killer has still not been caught and convicted. Now, I'm not sure if police still have a specific suspect, despite it being decades that they just don't have enough evidence on to convict, which is why they still may be walking our streets and, potentially making more victims. Or at this point, they just specifically don't have anyone anymore, but they do have this DNA that they're trying to use to rule people out, which is amazing. I am so glad that they have DNA in this case, despite it being years ago that they seem to have found this DNA and, isolated it. They still haven't, gotten the evidence to convict someone. But this DNA, if they are to match it to someone, would be the smoking gun to connect it to who killed Dana. So let's all be hopeful that eventually this DNA can be tested and connected to someone, because it's someone's, clearly. They clearly have male DNA. That person just hasn't been matched to it yet, which is extremely hopeful that this case can get solved. I am very curious if it is a money thing. If they potentially have this DNA, they just don't want to spend more money to run it through more databases. If that's the case, I am extremely interested, because is there a potential in the future that we could maybe raise money to have it tested, kind of like Criminal Coffee does with Stephanie Harlow and David Lavasser? They have, a company that they use the money for to try to solve cases, which is, I think, amazing. If that is the situation in certain cases like this, I would love to eventually in the future for us to all as a group be able to, potentially put funds towards something like that. That's obviously, a dream for the future, but it might not be even that in this specific case. They might be running it, but maybe this person's DNA isn't in any databases. Just because someone is doing these horrible things doesn't mean they've been caught for it yet. And they might have been doing it for decades. And hopefully they will eventually be caught. And then hopefully it will link to this DNA. Now, when it comes to social media spreading the word on this case, both police and Dana's family aren't very happy about it. And that is due to the rumors that have run rampant and the speculation because of social media. I think social media is an amazing tool to spread the word on these cases, or else I wouldn't be sitting here, I wouldn't be doing this every week. And I think it's been proven just from my comment section alone that these cases don't get enough coverage and they don't get spread far enough, despite the coverage that they already get. Because every single week, I still get comments of people saying, I didn't know about this case, even though it happened in my own backyard. And that says something to me. That says that we just need to continue to spread the word on these cases, because eventually it should spread far enough that it'll reach the people that have the information that will hopefully come forward and solve these cases. Someone out there knows something. It's just a matter of time for either the DNA to connect to someone or for those who have the information to come forward. But it really does hurt my heart that her family has experienced the opposite side of what social media can do. Social media can do amazing things, but it can also be very harmful. And clearly her family has experienced the negative side of it. And there also seems to be a lot of people online who have it out against the RCMP, and I can understand in certain scenarios. There are a lot of people who seem to be outraged on the family's behalf at how the RCMP has handled this case, yet the family is saying the opposite. The family is saying that they are very grateful for what the RCMP has done, and they feel like the RCMP is doing their job in this case. And that's because Dana's parents would say, quote, "From day one, the RCMP have been at our side and left no stone unturned, forming bonds of friendship with the many lead investigators over the years. We can only hope that the feeling of shame in what he has done has plagued him with a life filled with worry and fear at being found out, leaving him to be constantly looking over his shoulder, awaiting the hand of knowledge and his guilt to land on his shoulders." End quote. But that's kind of where this case is left now. Police have this DNA evidence that could eventually pinpoint to who did this incredibly horrible thing to this young girl, but they just need to match it to the right person. That's a lot more than the vast majority of these cases that we cover. But what do you think about this rivalry between Robert and all of the people that support his story, and then this information that seems to be out there that the RCMP disagrees with him, and apparently the guy he claims did it has been ruled out. And on top of that, if Robert did suffer horrible things, I truly wish he could get justice as well. I do truly hope that at the end of the day. What I also want to know is how you feel about the state at which Dana's body was left in. Clearly, it was left in a very specific positioning, again, as if her killer was remorseful, or possibly it was their first kill. That, or it was someone who knew her and felt remorseful. Let me know what you think, and I'll be in the comment section chatting with you all. I feel like this is one of those cases that might be a very heated comment section, but I'll be down there chatting. At the end of the day, my heart goes out to this family, and I truly hope they do get answers, and I truly hope Dana gets justice. And after all of this, if we can please take this case as a warning, please, please, please do not hitchhike. We have far too many of these cases of young girls and women who have went missing, especially in this time period, because of hitchhiking. I always say, lock your windows and doors, please be safe out there, but also please do not hitchhike. And I hope to see you in the next video.